This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone on the Talk Star Radio Network from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My producer tonight at Master Control at the home of the Talk Star Radio Network in Titusville, Florida, is my good friend Melanie. Mel, nice working with you again, as it is every night here on the X-Zone. And we're coming to you live and around the world through our growing, and I mean growing, family of broadcast affiliates across Canada, the United States, Central America, the Caribbean, South America, the Pacific Rim, 21 Asian countries, and across Europe. Our toll-free number is 1-877-528-8255. That is toll-free throughout the U.S., Canada, Alaska, and Hawaii at 1-877-528-8255. My guest this hour is Thomas Lyons. He is a modern-day mystic. And Thomas was... let's see how I can best describe this, all right? Thomas Lyons is an astrologer. He's a healer, writer, and mystic who has spent most of his 51 years seeking the answers to the great mysteries of life. From early childhood, a bearded priest would appear to him in visions and show him images of his own future, as well as many past lives, including a life in the late 1800s as a successful lawyer, writer, and teacher of mystical wisdom. As an adult, Thomas would still see the bearded man on rare occasions, and come to discover that the spiritual master from his childhood has been seen and described in the same way by many people around the world for over 100 years. Raised Irish Catholic, Thomas loved the mysticism of the Roman Church and considered joining a Catholic monastery order. But at the age of 16, he quietly left the church to pursue a study of the other great religions and mystical traditions of the world. Today, Thomas lives in Southern California with his wife, Rhonda, and works as a writer, editor, healer, and astrologer. His website, www.moderndaymystic.com. And Thomas, welcome back to the X-Zone. How are you, good sir?
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me again.
Always great having you with us. Tell me a little bit about this man with a beard that you used to see more frequently as a child, that you still see today, and that others around the world have reported seeing.
Well, actually, he's a guy known to the Theosophists, the people, Alice Bailey, Blavatsky, that whole crew. Basically, he's one of the people that Blavatsky supposedly was getting messages from, a guy referred to as El Moria. And I had no idea who this guy was. I just saw him throughout my childhood and just thought he was connected to me, but he would show me other things. And in one of the visions when I was about 8 years old, he showed me, he told me to remember this, very important to remember it. And it was New York City, which I'd never been to as a child. I grew up in Massachusetts in a small town. And he showed me the year was 1875. It was November. And a bunch of people were in sort of proper evening dress at the time in some apartments or rooms wood-paneled rooms in New York City. And this meeting was very important, and I was shown different people in the group. And one of the men in the group, I was to understand that he was me, that I was him in that lifetime, and I was involved in this group. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s, and through an odd set of circumstances, I kind of found myself on the board of directors of the Theosophical Society in Boston, that I discovered that the Theosophical Society under Madame Blavatsky was established in New York City in November of 1875, and that the fellow that I saw in the vision, supposedly me in that lifetime, was one of the early founders, one of the initial founders of the Theosophical movement in the United States.
Thomas, stand by. You and I have to take a 2-minute commercial break, and we'll be right back. When we come back, we're going to be asking Thomas Lyons some questions about astrology, including how it relates to Jay Leno's career right now. My name's Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. And Thomas Lyons' website, www.moderndaymistic.com. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Don't go away.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best.
Are you interested in the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, or psychic phenomenon? Join me, Tim Bartley, co-host of Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, coming mid-January 2017 to the XZBN. We will channel spirits live and talk to them, revealing all kinds of amazing information. Spiritual attachments will be found and removed on the show, and so much more. To find out when you can listen to Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, visit www.xzbn.net for listeners on both sides of the veil.
Thomas, how does astrology explain what's happening to Jay Leno's career right now?
Well, what's going on with Jay right now, my wife sort of pointed out to me the other day, and they're just a couple months apart, and she's going through what's called her second Saturn return. And the first Saturn return happens roughly at age 29 when you're turning 30. Mm-hmm. And that's what we in astrology call basically growing up. That's when you officially become adult as far as astrology is concerned. You leave that whole early phase of your life, that formative phase of your life behind. And typically around the time of the first Saturn return, or roughly age 30, people do major important things in their lives. They get married, they get divorced, they finish graduate school, or they get a major promotion, or they buy their first house, or they have their first baby. Major things happen that sort of ground you. Saturn is very grounding. It's very much about responsibility and taking responsibility. And Saturn's the time when it hits you really strongly, when it either forces you to take responsibility or really beats the crap out of you if you're not taking responsibility. It really kind of beats you down. But it's the heaviness and responsibilities and weight of life. Now, Jay, like my wife, is going through his second Saturn return right now. That means he's ending an entire 30-year phase of his life at age 59, and he's moving towards establishing the foundation for what he's going to do with the rest of his life. So all that he's been doing in the past is going away. Saturn basically, we experience Saturn as taking out of our lives that which has served its purpose, that is which has done its time for us. And now if we don't need it, it's time to let go of it, or it's time to reformat it or make it take a different shape. And so Jay's going through that right now, and what happened to him just a few days ago, he had Neptune exactly squaring his Mercury, which he's going through this year, but the exact aspect hit a few days ago. And that can be a time when he gets very, very confused or very uncertain, and there could have been some real uncertainty about his health, like just for a moment, like what's going on. He's also going through Jupiter square his Mercury and Jupiter over his ascendant this year, which means that Neptune square the Mercury and Jupiter square the Mercury means there's a lot of hope and possibility for what's coming up later this year. And we understand he's got a new TV show that they're going to try to make work 5 nights a week at 10 p.m. Pacific time out here. And they don't know if it's going to fly or not. So Jupiter over his ascendant back and forth, because it's retrograding as well, means that if he gets through December, if he can make it through to Christmas time and that show is still flying, then it will really perhaps start taking off for him. If not, he'll be freed up to do something else. But he probably has till about December, around Christmas time, to start making things work on that new show. But he's going through his Saturn return, and what he's doing is he's losing his TV show that he's been running for 17 years and was, sub-hosting for many years before that. And it wasn't his choice, it wasn't his idea. It was Saturn, if you will, taking that away from him, taking his TV show away from him, so to move him on to the next phase of his life. But that works for there. Now, Mel Gibson, I talked to you about Mel Gibson in my emails to you. Mel is also going through a major Saturn thing, but it's very different for him. What's happening is there's the Saturn cycle of his marriage. And you often hear on the TV, you'll hear so-and-so, they're breaking up after 29, 30 years of marriage, or so-and-so is ending their political career after 29 years in the Senate, or so you have a lot of this 29, 28, 20, 30-year kind of thing happening. And the reason for that, again, it is Saturn. Everything you start, whether it be a marriage or a business, a job, a family, whatever, at that roughly 29, 30-year point, there is a major transition that happens for you. And for him, really, it's the dissolution of his marriage. Now, we know he's been apart from his wife technically for 3 years, but now the announcement of the end of the marriage is actually happening exactly as Saturn is completing the 29 or so years since he actually got wed. He also has another major thing going on here. He has Pluto, which is a planet of death and rebirth. It rules Scorpio, going over what's called Lilith or Lilith in his chart. And Lilith represents the other woman, or the dark woman, or the woman who does not play by the rules. In mythology, Lilith was actually the precursor to Eve in some of Hebrew philosophy. They suggest that there was an earlier version of the wife for Adam, and that she basically was too radical or would not toe the line, and she was sort of got rid of, and Eve came in, who was more complacent, at least for a while. So Lilith in the chart, or sometimes called the dark moon or the black moon, represents often a dark woman in the sense of darker motives, or the person behind the scenes, or someone who comes in to sort of wreck the normal situation. It's not her fault, but in his chart, Pluto, the planet of Scorpio, the planet of sex and money and power and desire, has been going over Lilith during this particular time. That's also an indicator of that other woman or darker desires, or him making a very different choice than the marriage he'd chosen for 29 years.
1-877-528-8255 is toll free. Thomas Lyons is our special guest. His website is moderndaymistic.com. Now, are these kind of astrological things and astrological cycles predictable for everybody, Thomas?
Well, you can say yes and no. I like to use the analogy of the weather. There might be a terrible storm coming, and the storm could basically rattle your life to its core, or you could sleep through it. The influences are there, but it depends in large part to who you are at the core of your being as to how you respond, how you relate. Sometimes an astrological transit happening in someone's life could be the biggest turning event of their entire incarnation, and for somebody else it can kind of be like a rough day, And so it has a lot to do with who we are. But the charts are very complicated. Every chart in Western astrology is uniquely itself. There are no two people born at exactly the same moment in exactly the same place and time. Even identical twins are born minutes apart. And those a couple of minutes on the chart, the wheel, if you will, the Earth keeps spinning on its axis, and the chart, in terms of the dimensions of it, keep changing. In a few minutes' time, one planet can completely change what's called houses, meaning it's now that planet is in a completely different aspect or area of your life than it is for your brother or sister who was born a few minutes beforehand. The rising sign can change in a matter of a minute or two from one sign to another, and you have a completely different type of presentation in terms of how people perceive you, because instead of having Libra rising, which is very diplomatic and friendly, and people with Libra rising usually are kind of good-looking or charming or personable or very able to listen to other people's thoughts and sort of give them a fair shake. If you instead had Scorpio rising a couple of minutes later, you might have a much more intense person, much more willful, much more difficult to get to, a person much more controlling, because the rising sign shows how people experience you, how you sort of reach out there into the world. So every moment, every chart is different, every person is different, and the chart reflects those differences.
How many different types of astrology are there?
Oh gosh, most cultures have developed whatever their form of mysticism, and some of them are referred to as astrologies. There's popularly known now the Mayan astrology of ancient times, because everyone's looking at December 2012. There's the astrology of Burma, the Burmese astrology practiced traditionally by the Burmese monks there. And the Burmese astrology chart actually looks like a tic-tac-toe chart. That actually is like a couple of lines going up and down, a couple going across, and the planets, the inner planets that are seeable with a naked eye, are actually given house positions in a sort of tic-tac-toe chart. And then as they progress through, there's all these different formulas, mathematical formulas for creating other sort of tic-tac-toe looking charts, which tell you about the life. And it's very complex, as simple as it looks at a glance. There's what's called Jyotish, which is sometimes called Vedic or Hindu astrology. The astrology is practiced in India and Pakistan and other areas. And that's a lunar-based astrology, means its primary structure is given us by the movements of the moon throughout the course of the lunar month. So basically there's like 28 or 29 houses, depending on which version of Hindu astrology you're working at, to represent the 29 or so, 28, 29 days of the moon cycle around the Earth. Western astrology is typically a sun-based astrology, not for the sun signs per se, but it means we're looking at the sky in relationship to the equatorial regions of the Earth, where the sun moves through the equator back and forth from the Tropic of Cancer to the equator to the Tropic of Capricorn and back again on a map. And there's many different kinds of Western astrology. There's different ways of dividing up the sky. There's like a dozen different house systems that are used to divide the sky up, and the different reference points that are used. It's very, very elaborate. But it's like any other profession. There are people who are really, really, really good at what they do, and there are people who are really, really, really bad at the same thing. And most of us, if we don't know the discipline, we may not know the difference up front.
If someone was to give all the different astrologies the same information, would their charts be identical?
Oh, no, they'd be very different. But it's kind of like, say, if you're building a house, okay? Mm-hmm. One person is just doing design work for the house, and they're the plumber. So you'll get the plumbing schematics. And another will be the electrician. You get the electrical schematics. Another will be the carpenter, and you see the framing of the house and the joints and the different levels, and somebody else is the person who perhaps digs and pours the concrete foundation, so you'll see the foundation design, and somebody else is doing the sheetrocking, and so you'll have all these different schematics that'll tell you something about that house. In fact, the more pieces of the puzzle you get together, the more you can understand how that house works. So it's the legitimate astrologers of the world, of which there are several. They really are legitimately what they really do work. It's like, if you live in an igloo, if you will, your house is made of ice, and your door is a hole, and you may not have separate rooms inside. You have separate corners, if you will, of that circular room that you store your stuff. Whereas if you're living in a stone house in Europe with wooden beams for the floors, you might have a number of different rooms, and your house is built out of something very different, and the door might be a big wooden or metal door, and there might be glass windows.
I can understand what you're trying to say, but it makes no sense to me that if astrology is what many people profess to be the appropriate way of telling one's future and helping one out. That whether the person goes to a Vedic astrologer or whether they go to a Western astrologer, the chart should be the same. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break trying to make sense of astrology as the X Zone continues on the Talkstar Radio Network. Our special guest is Thomas Lyons. His website is www.moderndaymystic.com. My name's Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone, and you're listening to us on the Talkstar Radio Network. We'll be back after the news.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Thomas Lyons is our special guest, www.moderndaymystic.com. So as you were explaining to me, Thomas, it's like the different contractors and those who are building your house together, who each have a specialty, but they work together in order to build the house. Is that how I should understand it?
I think that's fair, yeah.
Okay, but if these disciplines are used to help a person along with their life, I still have a bit of a problem understanding why they wouldn't all be the same.
Well, they're not all the same because there are different approaches developed at different times by different cultures. My experience is that the more elaborate of the astrologies, it has more to do with the limitations of the people doing the work than the astrology per se.
Okay.
Because what these astrologies are is recognition of different energies and different cycles and different rhythms of life. And different people, different cultures have hooked on to different rhythms and different parts of the puzzle. It's like the great puzzle of life. Like many astrologers, when I was first learning astrology, almost nobody knew what the north and south node of the moon was. They didn't know what it was. Most people didn't even put it in the chart, and those who did were kind of like scratching their head trying to figure it out. And then I met a guy named Barry Lyons back when I was in my early mid-20s. And Barry sat me down and he explained the nodes. He'd studied them intensely, and he understood them. And he just completely blew my mind because he opened up a whole doorway in the chart that was so important that no one had ever told me. I hadn't seen it in any of the astrology books except odd references to we're not quite sure what these mean. And I started using them in my readings, and I had people say to me, "My God, I've had my astrology chart done by so many people, but no one ever no one ever saw that. That's like such a key part of my personality, yet no one could ever see it before." But now, here we are, 25, 30 years later, and pretty much it's taken for granted when you study Western astrology, you study the north and south nodes of the moon and what they mean, and their great importance in the chart. They're just as important as the sun or the moon or the rising sign for many astrologers now. Same thing with the asteroids or dwarf planets, or the fixed stars at the backdrop of our solar system as we look out. There are all different kinds of mathematical and geometric angles to look at, and most astrologists look at what are considered the major or primary or larger geometric angles, but there's practically an infinite number of smaller angles you could look at, and they all have information too. So it depends on how much you know, how deep you can go, how much time you have, how good a computer you have for calculating. And because there's so many aspects, you could spend your entire life just learning one astrology and never run out of things to learn, and you discover things. I meet astrologers who've been studying for 25 years, and all of a sudden their minds are completely blown, and they're showing me these equations that they saw in the chart, and it opens a whole other dimension that they never saw before. So I think it's one of the limitations of the people and what we have learned and taught to each other, rather than the limitations of the astrologies themselves necessarily.
The fact that Pluto isn't a planet any longer, how does this affect astrology?
Well, I mean, astrologers don't care. You can call it a kumquat in space, if you will, but its influence is pretty straightforward. Well, actually, what it's done is there are a number of other bodies out there now being referred to as dwarf planets. Before they were often being referred to as asteroids, and now what's happening is astrologers are taking a much closer look at lots of other bodies about the size of Pluto that they weren't paying so much attention to. So instead of Pluto being sort of discounted or demoted in some way by astrologers, instead what you're finding is a tremendous number of astrologers who sort of paid a passing glance to many of the large asteroids or dwarf planets in our solar system are now really studying in earnest those other planets and looking to see what their influences are. Because if Pluto is the same size in the same part of the sky and has such a profound influence on our lives, they figure these other bodies probably are pretty important too. We just didn't know about them before.
What influence does Pluto have on our lives?
Well, most Western astrologers will say that Pluto is a higher octave of, or the ruler of, Scorpio. And Pluto basically has to do with all the qualities you would equate with Pluto, with Scorpio, which is death, rebirth, transformation, going to the depths of yourself, planting seeds that can grow to extraordinary things. But the little thing that you do might seem very, very small at the time, but it can over time grow to be something quite extraordinary for the better or for the worse, depending on what it is that you planted and how you nurture it. Pluto right now is going through early Capricorn. And my wife was telling me for years, she's a very good psychic and also a damn good astrologer. And she was telling me for years, she kept on saying, everyone's worried about 2012. They should be worried about 2008 going into 2009 when Pluto hits Capricorn, because that's when the world's economies are going to collapse. And really, Pluto has a roughly 250-year cycle from our Earth's vantage point. And whenever it hits a certain area of the sky, it has profound effects. And so Pluto hitting Capricorn represents government. It represents leaders, traditionally male leaders, but these days either or. It represents the father figure. It represents corporations. It represents the rules and the structures and the foundations we've built over time. And Pluto basically destroys and undermines those structures and causes them, the ones that are not solid enough, the ones that are not sturdy enough, to literally break apart and die so that something new can be born. But the process of the old dying off can be a pretty rough experience, and we're experiencing that internationally right now with Pluto in the first few degrees of Capricorn. In fact, Pluto, when Mexico they announced all these people started dying of this type of influenza in Mexico a few days ago. And my wife said, you know what, I bet it's because Pluto often also deals with disease and tiny little things that you can't see with the naked eye, like those little seeds or little germs inside you. And she said, I bet Pluto's doing something really major to the Mexican chart. So I went online, I looked up the Mexican chart, which the modern Mexican chart is for the Mexican Revolution, the Socialist Revolution. So that's January 31st, 1917 at roughly 4 p.m. It was a bunch of leaders got together, revolutionary leaders, and signed the new Constitution in a theater in central Mexico. And so that is considered the birth chart by many astrologers for Mexico. And when I looked at it, I realized Pluto is exactly opposing the natal Pluto of Mexico, which happens once every century plus. And what you see is Pluto in the chart of Mexico is in the sign of Cancer, which has to do with the home and the people. And Pluto opposing it in Capricorn basically is there's terrible things happening to the people per se, as opposed to the government or as opposed to the water systems or as opposed to something else. And the Pluto in their chart is in the house of what you might refer to as hidden enemies, the 12th chart. So therefore, this enemy, in this case, this disease, sort of came out of nowhere and was not predictable and not seen by the people, and suddenly here it is wreaking havoc on them. And it's exactly dead across. I mean, Pluto was 2 degrees and 41 minutes, the third degree of Cancer in the Mexican Revolution chart. and right now Pluto is in a very early part of the third degree of Capricorn, exactly the other side of the sky. And you know that something's going to happen, but you don't know what. But Pluto was transiting the sixth house of the Mexican Revolution chart, and the sixth house is the house of health. Health and healing and service and hard work and getting through the tough times just by getting up every day and going through it. And it's opposing the natal Pluto in the 12th house, which has to do with hidden enemies. In this case, the enemy is a bacteria.
What does Western astrology say about December 21st, 2012?
Actually, it doesn't say a whole heck of a lot. It really doesn't. It really is a Mayan astrology. The Mayans had their own very, very elaborate astrological system, and it took a long time to get it together. Really what's happening from a Western astrology or Western astronomical vantage point is that when we see that around the time of the winter solstice at the end of 2012, is when we look out from the Earth's vantage point, we will see the sun sort of right at a point in the sky that is for us the center of the goes to the center of the galaxy. It's really just a point in the sky that the sun will be apparently in front of from our vantage point. But if you were on a different planet in our solar system, the sun would not appear to be going over that point in the sky at all. It would appear to be going over a completely different point in the sky. So for what it has to do with us, it's not a very exceptional chart from an astrological vantage point from Western astrology. And whether or not something exceptional happens or not, I guess we ultimately have to wait till the end of 2012 to see what goes down. But basically the real event itself is the sun appearing from the Earth's vantage point to be going over the center of the galaxy, passing over the center of the galaxy, which it does only twice in its Mayan cycle, which is many thousands of years from one point to another. So they consider it the passing of a certain age and the beginning of another age in Mayan astrology.
So why does it have this connotation of being total doom and gloom, Armageddon, the end of the world? Why are people, not everyone, I'm talking about the minority here, who are out there and they're on their little soapboxes talking about doom and gloom? It's Armageddon. It's the book of Revelations coming to life.
Well, once you get an idea out there, ideas tend to sort of have a life of their own and sort of grow on their own. Jess Stern, who my wife worked for a few years before Jess's death, became famous and very rich by writing a book in the 1960s called Edgar Cayce's The Sleeping Prophet, about an American psychic and mystic, Edgar Cayce. And Jess extrapolated from the Cayce readings extraordinary turning point by 1998, in which basically Jess determined from going through all of these thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of readings that the United States was going to be partially underwater by 1998. Most of California will be underwater or fallen off the face of the earth due to earthquakes and all kinds of extraordinary earth changes. And a lot of folks at AIRE ultimately did not agree with Jess's take on Edgar Cayce's readings in bits and pieces. But by putting that out there, you had a tremendous number of people, including very gifted psychics and astrologers and others, who bought the idea and started revamping their worldview to fit North America being half underwater by 1998. And the stories went on, and the lectures went on, and the talks went on, and the experts came out, and the books were written, and lots of money was made, and documentaries were done on TV, and of course California, where I live, is still substantially above water. And 2000, 2001, that whole big deal. An idea gets in people's heads, and they run with it. In the case of 2012, that the winter solstice, approximately at the end of 2012, that's the end of a critical or a major cycle in Mayan astrology, and it happens to correlate with, according to some people's beliefs, correlate with the end of some other cycles that were seen by other people in other cultures. And so the end, in most people's mind, means just like, oh my God, 1998, North America is coming to an end, or, so the end in astrology typically means the end of one cycle and the beginning of a new cycle or a new phase.
1-877-528-8255 is toll free. My very special guest this hour is Thomas Lyons. And if you'd like to contact Thomas, his website is www.moderndayMystic.com. Here's a question for you, and I'm sure you've been asked this many times, Thomas.
Sure.
How does Barack Obama's astrological chart compare to or differ from George W. Bush's chart?
Well, it's interesting. Barack Obama is a Leo, okay? And so he has this real sense of presence and confidence. By contradistinction or comparison, George W. Bush has Leo rising, Mercury and Pluto and Venus all in Leo in the first house. So that's his presentation. So George, throughout his life, has presented himself as being very confident. But his sun is actually in Cancer, which tends to have a lot of worries and self-doubt and questioning of oneself. And his sun is in the 12th house, which means he doesn't really know who he is at the core of his being. There's a lot of uncertainty. But the sun in the 12th house of a Western chart shows that part of him is hidden generally from view. So what he presents is his rising sign, that Leo rising and other planets that are very, very strong rising. But the core of his being is very uncertain, whereas the core of Barack Obama's being is very certain. He is a sun in Leo with his Mercury in Leo, and his sun is in the 6th house, which means he's a detail-oriented guy. He studies and gets the facts right and works hard, whereas George has more of a tendency to talk well with that Mercury right on the ascendant. Mercury rules the words that come out of our mouths and what we have to say. So he's very, very good at just opening his mouth and saying what he wants and charming people. Now, it's a little different when you're reading speeches and that people have written for you off of a teleprompter. George was a little awkward with that. But as far as charming people one-to-one, there was nobody better at it. But in the core of his being, he was much more uncertain. Also, George Bush has his moon in Libra, which itself is, again, he can be very, very good with people, really caring one-on-one with other people, but also emotionally, he really depends upon his partner a great deal. Whereas Barack Obama has his moon in Gemini, and he's much more able to fly solo, although he really enjoys the company of his partner and the partner of others. But George almost needs the partner to work with, whether it be a political partner, whether it be a Karl Rove or Dick Cheney or his wife Laura.
Thomas, you and I have to take a commercial break. We'll be back after this commercial set. Thomas Lyons is our special guest, www.moderndaymystic.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break as the X Zone continues on Talkstar.
18 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant, check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Thomas Lyons is our special guest, www.moderndaymystic.com. And Thomas, who's better or who's more accurate at giving readings, astrologers or psychics?
Again, it really comes down to the individual. There are some astrologers who will completely blow your doors off, and there are some psychics the same deal. Other psychics and other astrologers, you go, okay, I guess that kind of makes some sense. And it really is the individual, because it's all about ability.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the ability to tune into you and to do what they do well. And just like one surgeon can save your life when nobody else could have, another surgeon will basically kill you in the first 10 minutes. It all depends on who's holding the scalpel.
How can someone know, or what are the signs that a person is not a very good astrologer?
Well, if they tell you, if they can talk to you and tell you things that really do hit at the core of your being as being correct, one after another, then you know they're at least on track of reading your personality. But if they're jumping all over the place, guessing and trying to get to the information and having to sort of lead you or be led by you to the information, then they probably are not so good. If they tell you this important event is happening in your life and nothing goes down, then you kind of need to question that.
Yeah.
But if they tell you there's an important influence, and here's the nature of the influence, and here's what to expect at that particular time, and those pieces come together, then you know at least they know what they're doing. But it's like any other profession. After a while, if you spend a little bit of time with them, and I would typically go for recommendations from other people. If people that you think are smart people, that you would take their opinion, think this person's really good, then maybe you should give them a shot. But if the person who says this person's really good basically is easily influenced and will say anybody's good, then they're not the right person to ask.
Thomas, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's always a great pleasure talking to you. Take care of yourself. Give my very best to your wife. And I look forward to the next time that you and I meet here in the X Zone.
Thanks, Rob. Good night, man.
Good night. Take care, buddy. www.moderndaymistic.com. Thomas Lyons was our guest this hour. Once again, his website, www.moderndaymistic.com. When I come back from the news at the top of the hour at 6.5 minutes past, Dr. Maurice A. Ramirez is going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about swine flu again. And we're going to be discussing what the emergency preparedness is going to, how it's going to happen should the swine flu take off in an epidemic, pandemic, like many people within the medical community are tending to say that this may in fact be another 1918 flu. Mind you, in 1918, 30 to 50 million people died. Hopefully, this swine flu will not have the same effect that the 1918 one did have on the world. I'll be back on the other side of the news as the X Zone continues live and around the world on the Talk Star Radio Network from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.